You're not here by accident. There's a reason this video found you now. Perhaps you've been feeling a strange calm after chaos, or noticing that things that used to hurt no longer do. Is that healing, or have you simply become numb? Carl. Jung believed that true emotional growth doesn't look like a sudden breakthrough. It looks like quiet inner shifts. It looks like peace without explanation, like strength that doesn't roar, like no longer needing to prove anything to anyone. Not even yourself. If you're here, chances are your soul is evolving. But healing is not loud. That's why so many people don't even notice they're already healing. They still think something is wrong because they don't feel pain or anger or urgency the way they used to. But that absence? That's one of the signs. Today we're going to explore the 7 most powerful signs that you're finally healing, based on Carl Jung's teachings about emotional maturity and integration. These are not just psychological patterns. These are soul awakenings. And if even one of these resonates with you, it means you're much further along than you think. Stay with me to the end. And if you're walking this path of healing and truth, you'll want to subscribe and join this growing community. Also, I've created a powerful ebook on Carl Jung's map to self-healing and integration. Check the pinned comment to learn how it can support your journey. Let's begin. Healing is not always the loud, cinematic moment we imagine. More often it arrives like a whisper, subtle, quiet, and almost invisible to those around us. Carl Jung understood this deeply. To him, healing wasn't about escaping the shadow, but integrating it. He taught that we do not become whole by chasing the light, but by embracing the darkness we've spent our lives running from. So if you're here wondering why you feel different lately, maybe calmer, less reactive, more distant from old chaos, this is not a sign of indifference. It might be the first real sign that you're healing. Jung believed that the psyche seeks balance. When we stop suppressing our pain, numbing our emotions and hiding our true selves, something profound begins to unfold inside us. Integration. And integration is the foundation of all emotional maturity. What many people call apathy is sometimes the body's way of saying, you don't need to fight anymore. What others label as detachment might be your nervous system finally releasing tension it held for years. The journey back to wholeness rarely comes with fanfare. It's marked by moments of silence, by choosing not to react, by no longer being triggered by the things that once stole our peace. These are not coincidences. They are milestones. In this video, we will explore 7 powerful signs that your inner healing is well underway. Each one is grounded in Jungian thought, yet illuminated by the quiet spiritual truths we often overlook in the rush to fix ourselves. This is not a checklist. It's a mirror, held up to your soul, so you can finally recognize the transformation already blooming within. Let's begin with the first sign, and if it resonates, trust that it's not just theory. It's your inner self remembering its original shape. You've stopped fighting yourself. Healing doesn't always feel like transformation. Sometimes it feels like quiet surrender, the kind that doesn't mean giving up, but finally giving in to who you really are. One of the first, and often most misunderstood signs of deep healing is this. You no longer live in a constant battle with your own mind. There was a time when you resisted every thought, every emotion, every part of yourself that felt wrong. You tried to silence the fear. You tried to correct the sadness. You tried to deny the anger. But now, there's less war inside you. Carl Jung taught that true integration begins the moment we stop rejecting the parts of ourselves we once tried to erase. Not because they disappeared, but because we began to see them differently. We stopped seeing our emotions as enemies. We began to relate to them as messengers. If you've noticed a softness settling in, a gentle willingness to observe yourself, without judgment, to feel without reacting, to exist without demanding perfection, this is not apathy, it's peace. It's not that the voice in your head is gone, it's just kinder now, more patient, less cruel. You no longer scream at yourself for being tired. You don't call yourself lazy for needing rest. You don't spiral into shame for having a bad day. Instead, you listen, you pause, you offer yourself space. That's emotional maturity. This Shift often feels so quiet that we don't even recognize it. We think healing has to be dramatic. But the truth is, the end of internal war is often marked by silence, not celebration. And silence can feel uncomfortable at first, because you've lived so long in chaos. But gradually this quietness begins to feel like home. You start forgiving yourself for not having all the answers. You stop trying to fix who you are and begin honoring who you've always been. Jung described this process as a return to the self, the central organizing force of your psyche. The self doesn't demand that you be perfect. It only wants you to be whole, and wholeness includes your fear, your failures, your past. You might notice that you're less triggered by things that used to send you into spirals. You don't suppress your feelings. You just don't drown in them anymore. You feel anger, but you don't become it. You feel anxiety, but you don't get consumed by it. You feel sadness, but you no longer believe it means you're broken. This is how you know something has shifted. Not because your life looks perfect, but because your relationship with yourself has changed. You've stopped demanding that your healing be linear. You've stopped comparing your timeline to others. You've stopped apologizing for still carrying scars. You're finally letting yourself be human. And in Jung's work, that's the very definition of soul work, to embrace all parts of the psyche, without splitting, without denial. What once felt like failure now feels like information. What once felt like a flaw now feels like a signpost. You no longer resist your past, you include it. This doesn't mean you've lost your standards or given up on growth. On the contrary, you've developed discernment. You now know the difference between growing and self-abandoning. You know when to push and when to rest. You know how to hear the critical voice in your head and choose not to obey it. And maybe, for the first time in your life, you actually trust yourself. Not because you're certain, but because you've survived enough storms to know your presence is enough. This is the essence of healing, when you stop needing to control or prove or perfect, and instead in what you just exist, fully, honestly, gently. That's not weakness, that's power. You begin to feel peace in the absence of explanation. There's a particular kind of peace that arrives before you even understand it. You can't explain it. You can't justify it. You just feel still. You're not euphoric. You're not healed. You're not done. But for some reason, you're no longer sinking. You're simply breathing. And for the first time in a long time, that feels like enough. Carl Jung often wrote about the numinous, the spiritual quality of inner experience. He believed that healing wasn't about achieving clarity. It was about returning to a deeper presence, one that didn't need to understand everything in order to feel safe. When your soul begins to heal, the nervous system quiets, not because there's no chaos around you, but because your internal world no longer mirrors that chaos. Your thoughts slow, your body releases tension it held for years. You stop over-explaining your pain. You stop justifying your joy. You start feeling safe without needing proof. This is the kind of peace that doesn't need to be earned. It simply arises. For years, maybe you searched for peace like it was some destination, at the end of a checklist or hidden in the approval of someone else. But now you're starting to realize peace is not the absence of noise. It's the ability to sit with yourself, even when the noise is there, and not be afraid of what you hear. You no longer interpret silence as danger. You no longer panic when life slows down. You don't rush to fill space with noise or activity or validation, because something inside you knows stillness is not emptiness. It's sacred space. This kind of peace might confuse others. They might say you've changed, that you're distant, less reactive, less intense. And maybe they're right, but what they don't see is that your energy is no longer tangled in survival. You've stopped giving so much of yourself away just to feel connected. Now, your energy flows inward first. You fill your own well before offering it to the world. You're no longer chasing resolution in every conversation. You're no longer addicted to closure. You're no longer looking for people to validate your healing. You simply feel what you feel. And that's enough. That's emotional evolution. Jung believed that true transformation happens when we stop defining ourselves by what we've lost and start reconnecting with what still lives inside us, not as a performance, but as a return. This peace is the return, and yes, sometimes it comes with grief, because when you stop fighting for your worth, you realize how long you've been at war with yourself. But even the grief feels different now. It doesn't destroy you, it softens you, it deepens you. You don't cry because you're broken. You cry because something sacred is blooming inside you, and your body can finally feel it. This is the paradox. The less you try to force healing, the more it finds you. The less you demand answers, the more your soul speaks. The more you allow space for quiet, the more you begin to hear the truth you've been carrying all along. That's why people often say, "I don't know why I feel calm, but I do." That not knowing is not a problem. It's the clearest sign of inner integration. When your soul outgrows the drama, the chaos, the self-betrayal, there's nothing to explain anymore. There's only peace, and peace doesn't shout. It just is. You no longer identify with the old version of yourself. There's a moment in healing when you look back at your past self, not with shame, not with bitterness, but with tenderness. You remember who you were. You remember the mistakes, the reactions, the fear. But it no longer defines you. It no longer owns you. You've stopped identifying with the version of yourself that was just trying to survive. Carl Jung believed that the ego clings to familiar patterns, because even pain feels safer than the unknown. That's why most people repeat their cycles. They stay in relationships, jobs, roles, even identities that no longer serve them, simply because they don't know who they are without them. But when you start to heal, something remarkable happens. You stop trying to resurrect who you used to be. You no longer say, "I just want to feel like myself again," because you know that version of you wasn't free, that version of you wasn't whole, that version of you was reacting from wounds, not living from truth. And now you've made space for a different kind of self to emerge, a self that isn't built on defense mechanisms, a self that isn't driven by fear or the need to prove, a self that doesn't overcompensate or perform or beg for validation. This is the self Jung spoke of, the central archetype of your psyche. Not your persona, not your past, but the you beneath all of that, the one who has always been there, waiting for a homecoming. And when this happens, you begin to notice that certain things feel foreign. Places you used to go, people you used to chase, roles you used to play, they don't fit anymore. Not because something is wrong with them, but because you've outgrown the version of yourself that needed them. This is not arrogance. This is clarity. You stop engaging in the same arguments. You stop explaining your worth. You stop tolerating what once seemed normal. You begin to feel a deeper loyalty to yourself, not to the version others expect, not to the one who used to overfunction to feel loved, but to the you who is finally remembering your center. And this shift is internal. It's quiet. It's not about making announcements. It's not about telling people, "I've changed." It's in your boundaries, your silence, your peace. The past still exists, but it doesn't own you. You can look at it and say, "That was me," but it's not all of me, and it's not who I am now. That detachment is sacred, not because you're erasing your story, but because you're no longer confusing survival strategies with identity. You might find yourself grieving who you used to be, because that version of you did their best. They carried the pain. They built the walls. They kept you alive. And now, you get to thank them. Not by staying stuck in their shape, but by growing beyond it. Jung believed the goal of life was individuation, the full expression of the self. And individuation doesn't happen by perfecting the ego. It happens when the ego bows to something deeper, the soul. So if you find yourself walking away from roles that once made you feel valuable, if you no longer feel the urge to prove, impress, or fit in, if you've begun to feel peace in simply being, that's not emptiness, that's identity, finally becoming real, and that's healing. You stop trying to be understood. At some point in your healing, something inside you surrenders the exhausting need to explain yourself. You no longer feel the impulse to justify your boundaries. You don't need others to validate your pain. You stop arguing for your story to be heard. And that silence is not defeat, it's freedom. Carl Jung wrote that the individual who steps into wholeness no longer looks outward for approval because their foundation is internal. Not inflated by ego, not defensive, just steady. When you begin to heal, you realize that not everyone will understand your journey, and that's okay. It doesn't mean you're wrong. It means your truth is no longer up for debate. You used to explain your triggers. You used to overshare your healing process. You used to try to get people to see you, to really see you, but now you know not everyone is meant to walk with you. Some people can't meet you where you are. Some people only knew the version of you that didn't know how to say no, and if they walk away when you choose wholeness over pleasing, you let them. Not with bitterness, but with clarity, because you're no longer begging for belonging. You belong to yourself now, and that kind of self-loyalty transforms everything. Your relationships shift. Your conversations deepen. Your social circle may shrink, but your inner peace expands. You realize that being understood is not a requirement for being authentic. Your truth doesn't become less true because someone else can't hold it. You stop wasting your energy defending what is sacred. You stop shrinking your story so others can feel comfortable. You stop hiding your voice to maintain the illusion of harmony. Now you walk with integrity. Your silence is not suppression, it's sovereignty. You no longer seek resolution with people who misunderstand you on purpose. You don't stay in spaces that demand you abandon yourself for the sake of connection. You've stopped translating your pain into languages that other people refuse to hear. And that decision to stay loyal to your own soul, even when others walk away, is healing. Deep, irreversible healing. Jung believed that individuation required us to step away from the collective, not in arrogance but in devotion to inner truth. That doesn't mean you isolate. It means you stop filtering your expression to maintain belonging in places that never honored your full self. You stop performing. You stop apologizing. You stop trying to be palatable. Instead, you choose to be real, even if your honesty shakes the room. Even if your boundaries disappoint someone. Even if your absence is louder than your presence ever was. And when people question your changes, you no longer explain. Because transformation doesn't come with footnotes. It comes with frequency. You've changed. Your energy has changed. And you don't owe anyone a roadmap. Your life is no longer built on being understood. It's built on being aligned, and when your alignment is clear, your voice softens. Not because you have less to say, but because you no longer need to say it to be whole. That's the power of healing. You begin to move from reaction to response before healing. Life often feels like a series of emotional landmines. A word, a look, a memory. Anything can set off a wave of reaction. You lash out, shut down, collapse, defend. You don't respond. You react, but then something shifts, quietly, powerfully. You start to feel a pause between what happens and how you respond to it. And that pause, it's not hesitation, it's mastery. Carl Jung believed that the unhealed psyche reacts from shadow, those repressed unconscious parts of the self. But once we begin to integrate those shadows, our responses slow down. Our energy becomes deliberate, centered. If you've noticed that you're no longer pulled into every emotional current, that you can feel discomfort and still choose your behavior, this is a profound sign of psychological and spiritual maturity. You no longer respond from the wounded child. You no longer act from the abandoned part of you. You've started responding from the self. This doesn't mean you're numb. Quite the opposite. You feel everything, deeper than ever, but you don't become the emotion. You hold it. Observe it. Let it inform you, not dominate you. This is a radical shift, and most people will never recognize it because it happens internally. It's not visible. It doesn't come with applause. But it changes everything about how you move through the world. You begin to realize you don't have to fix every discomfort. You don't have to control every situation. You don't have to react to protect your ego. You can simply be with what is and respond from your center. This is what Jung called individuation, when you're no longer ruled by complexes or conditioned scripts. When the self, not the fear, not the past, not the trauma, becomes the voice that leads you, you become more silent. Not because you're repressed, but because you don't speak unless it adds truth. You walk away from drama, not because you're Weak, but because you value your peace more than your ego. You stop texting paragraphs to explain yourself. You stop defending your every decision. You stop trying to win arguments just to feel seen. Instead, you breathe, you pause. And in that pause, you meet your real self. And this shift doesn't just change how you respond, it changes what you attract. Because the moment you stop reacting from wounds, you stop inviting wounded dynamics, you stop reenacting the same pain in new costumes, you become rooted, you become selective. Not out of fear, but out of deep self-respect. And yes, some people will say you've changed. You don't care anymore. You're distant. But what they're really feeling is that you've stopped playing a role. You've stopped shrinking. You've stopped engaging from the energy that once needed them. Now you respond from your wholeness. And wholeness is powerful. It doesn't chase. It doesn't prove. It doesn't react. It chooses. This ability to respond rather than react is not about perfection. You'll still have moments where you're triggered, you'll still slip, but you'll catch yourself quicker. You'll repair faster. You'll return to yourself with more grace. That's what healing looks like. It's not about never falling. It's about learning to rise differently. And when you can respond from awareness rather than defense, from clarity rather than fear, you don't just heal yourself. You change the energy of every room you walk into. You stop being a mirror for pain. You become a mirror for presence, and presence is the most healing force there is. You no longer abandon yourself to be loved. There was a time when love meant self-abandonment. You silenced your truth to avoid conflict. You softened your edges to be accepted. You tolerated things that broke your soul just to feel like you mattered to someone. But now, that version of you is dissolving, and in its place something far more sacred is rising. A self that refuses to leave itself again, no matter who walks away. Carl Jung believed that when we abandon the self to be loved, we trade authenticity for attachment. We split ourselves in two, the true self who feels, wants and senses, and the adapted self who performs, pleases, endures. But healing means bringing those parts back together. It means becoming whole again, even if that wholeness costs you someone who only loved the mask. If you've begun to notice that you no longer shrink in the presence of others, that you don't contort yourself to keep the peace, that you'd rather be alone than betray your inner voice, that's not selfishness, that's liberation. You stop apologizing for your boundaries. You stop over-explaining your needs. You stop abandoning your own body, heart and truth just to be chosen. You begin to understand that being chosen by others means nothing if you've had to reject your own soul to make it happen. So you choose yourself, and not in a superficial cliché way, but in a deep revolutionary way, a way that says, I will not abandon me, even if it means disappointing you. And it's terrifying at first, because you were taught to earn love, to beg for it, to shape-shift for it, to call it compromise when it was really self-erasure. But now you know, love that demands you betray yourself is not love. It's dependency dressed in intimacy, and you're not available for that anymore. You start to notice the signs earlier, the subtle ways people expect you to make yourself smaller, the invisible contracts that say, I'll stay, as long as you stay silent. And you tear those contracts up, quietly, respectfully, powerfully. Not out of rebellion, out of self-devotion. You no longer tolerate connections that require your silence. You no longer stay in rooms where your spirit shrinks. You no longer confuse abandonment with love. And in that fierce return to yourself, something beautiful happens. You become magnetic to people who honor your truth. Because now you do. You speak up. You stay centered. You express your needs without shame. And you leave when the price of staying is your own soul. Jung taught that healing happens when we stop projecting the need for validation outward and integrate it inward. You become your own source of love, of presence, of reassurance. You stop waiting for someone else to rescue you. You become the one who shows up for your inner child. You rewrite the script that says, I must earn love by abandoning who I am. Instead, you embody a new story. I am worthy of love precisely because I no longer abandon myself. And this is where love becomes real, not performative, not addictive, not conditional. You attract relationships that reflect your wholeness, not your wounds. You form bonds based on mutual truth, not mutual fear. You show up fully and expect others to do the same, and when they don't, you don't beg. You bless and release, because your self-loyalty is no longer negotiable, it's sacred. Peace becomes your default, not a reward for most of your life. Peace felt like a reward you had to earn. You believed it would arrive when everything was perfect, when no one was upset with you, when your to-do list was done, when the pain was gone, when you were finally enough. But healing teaches you something radical. Peace is not a destination. It's your birthright, and it doesn't come from the outside in. It rises from the inside, when the war within you ends. Carl Jung wrote that, "True transformation comes not when we change the world around us, but when we bring order to the world within." And if you've begun to feel peace, even when your life isn't perfect, even when you don't have all the answers, even when things are uncertain, that is not denial, that is integration. Peace no longer waits for external permission. It no longer needs everything to be still, it simply is. You wake up and there's space in your chest. You move through your day without bracing for impact. You experience joy without fearing it will be taken away. You sit with silence and don't feel like you need to fill it. And most importantly, you stop sabotaging peace the moment you feel it. There was a time when stillness made you anxious, because it felt unfamiliar, unsafe, like something bad was about to happen. But now, you allow yourself to rest. You trust calmness. You believe you're worthy of softness. And that shift changes everything. You no longer chase drama for stimulation. You no longer confuse chaos with love. You stop romanticizing suffering as a sign of depth. You begin to crave simplicity, not because life is boring, but because your nervous system is finally stabilizing. You start creating space. In your home. In your schedule. In your relationships. Not because you're isolating, but because you're no longer addicted to noise. Peace becomes your baseline, not your reward for productivity, perfection, or performance. And when it's disturbed, you notice it immediately. Not because you're fragile, but because you're attuned. You can feel when your center is off. You know how to return to it. You no longer need to collapse to remember who you are. This is one of the clearest signs that you're healing. You live from your center, not your trauma. You're not waiting for the next crisis. You're not on edge. You're not building peace only to destroy it with self-sabotage. You hold it. You protect it. You let it expand. And in that space, your intuition sharpens. Your clarity deepens. Your choices become more aligned. You stop explaining your peace to those who thrive on chaos. You no longer need to defend your calm. You simply live it, and that stillness you carry? It speaks louder than any argument. It's felt before you say a word. People might not understand your calm. They might think you're distant, cold, detached, but you know the truth. You're just not leaking energy anymore. You're no longer fighting battles that aren't yours. You're no longer performing for people who can't meet you. You're no longer proving yourself to systems that never saw your worth. You're just here, breathing, rooted, awake. And that is the kind of peace that can't be bought or performed. It is earned through your courage to confront every storm inside of you. Jung believed the soul craves wholeness, not perfection. And peace is what happens when the soul finally feels safe to rest inside you. This doesn't mean life won't challenge. Are you again? It will. But your response is different now, not reactive, not panicked, but present. You understand that peace is not the absence of emotion. It's the capacity to hold it all, without being torn apart by it. That is healing. That is spiritual power. That is a soul remembering its strength. This is what wholeness feels like. There's a moment in every true healing journey when something clicks. It's not loud. It doesn't come with fireworks. But it's undeniable. You realize you're no longer trying to fix yourself, because now you remember you were never broken. You were simply fragmented, scattered across time, trauma, memory, and masks. And piece by piece you've been gathering yourself, with tenderness, with courage, with intention. This is not the kind of healing that demands applause. It's not the kind that comes from books, gurus, or rituals. It's the quiet kind. The kind that shows up when no one's watching. The kind that grows in silence, breath, and truth. Carl Jung knew this. The true path is not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you've always been, beneath the armor, beneath the performance, beneath the fear. And if you've made it to the end of this message, it's because that remembering has already begun. You are not who you were. Not because the pain disappeared, but because you finally chose to walk with it, to honor it, to let it teach you and not define you. This is what wholeness feels like, not perfection, but alignment. And once you've touched that space within, there's no going back. So protect your peace, honor your pace, walk with your soul even when no one understands it. And above all, never abandon yourself again to be loved. If this journey has spoken to something deep within you, know this: you're not alone. There's a whole world of souls waking up just like you. Subscribe to this channel so you never forget this path. And if you're ready to go deeper, discover the truths that Carl Jung left behind. Truths that can shift your entire inner world inside our ebook on self-integration and shadow work. It's waiting for you. This isn't just healing, it's your return home. And from now on, you never walk alone.